I meet a lot of guys that they met this person and they started out in a certain way, but then ultimately they get on their own growth path, and then the other person isn't. They're just doing their own thing, and they're kind of sleepwalking through life. And the other guy's like, I don't know if I want to be with this person anymore. They're great, and I love them, but they're always like, how do I get them to blah blah blah? And I was like, you don't. But that first phone call, you grilled the fuck out of me.
I'd like to not think of it as grilling or interrogating.
I wasn't intimidated by it. I was really happy about it because you weren't curious about my favorite color or anything like that. You were drilling into to understand my worldview. You wanted to understand my values. And so I wanted to draw that up because we started from that place.
Yeah.
You are listening to the new man beyond the Macho Jerk and the New Age Wimp. Your host is men's coach Tripp Lanier.
What would make you excited to commit to a relationship? Are you afraid to set a high bar for someone because it may mean you'll end up alone? And what does it mean if you can't stop nitpicking your partner? In today's coffee date, my wife Alyson and I recall the first phone conversation we ever had. In that call, she grilled me for hours about my values, or as she puts it, what makes you kneel or bow. So today we talk about the value of being radically honest early on and why being out of alignment on the big stuff dooms us to struggle with the small stuff.
Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
This isn't our wedding anniversary. You prefer this anniversary.
I prefer this anniversary because this is the day that everything changed.
What happened on this day?
Well, I don't know if it's appropriate to say you were courting me, but you were
my liege. Yes, we met at the ball.
Are you asking what happened on this day? Like,
Well, what's the
should
anniversary?
Should there be some context? Oh,
yeah. How would you describe it?
Well, how I would describe it is this is the day that we really met in person. This was the day of our first date.
Mm-hmm.
And we had met via email because I wouldn't give out my phone number. We met via email through Marcy Davis and Stu Davis in October. And I was under a commitment to myself that kind of on a no man diet for a year. And I was refusing to go beyond just getting to know you a little bit over email before today. And, a week before today, we talked on the phone.
The anniversary today.
Yeah, the anniversary. Sorry. Yeah, I used to say, you know what I mean.
So a week before we had our first date.
A week before we had our first phone call. And that phone call was a great call where we really I got to hear your voice and we really got to know each other. And then at the end of that call, you said, "That's it, I have to meet you." And then back in the day, I had a flip phone. After the next day of work, I called in for my voicemails and listened to my voicemails. And there was a voicemail from you saying, "I'd like to take you out on a date. I'm flying in on December 16th at 5:00. I'll pick you up at 7." And
I flew from Florida to Colorado to take you on a date.
That's right. You did. That was a baller move. And so I celebrate this day. I mean, weddings are great, and we had a fantastic wedding, and wedding anniversaries are great. But this is really when this was really the day that I think things changed for both of us. Even though back then we didn't know if it was gonna turn out to be anything. I still look back when I think of being sentimental about a particular date. Mm-hmm. It's this day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it was a big weekend we spent together before I flew back, and I think it scared the hell out of both of us because we both knew this was going to really disrupt our lives.
for sure. Yeah, definitely.
Well, that's one of the things that I wanted to ask you about.
What was one
The call, because you were very evasive. Before then.
evasive?
Yeah, we weren't able to communicate.
Oh, you mean leading up to the call?
Leading up to the call, you were evasive. This
Yeah.
was before social media. There wasn't a way that I could learn about
Oh,
you.
yeah.
I
Yeah,
couldn't spy on you online or anything.
Exactly. Yeah. Which was great for me because I didn't want it as a female. I didn't want a distance thing, some guy from across the nation to decide that he liked me based on what he could project onto me and like based on my body or
Right.
how I looked.
But you kept the interactions we did have were limited to email.
Yeah.
At that time.
They were, they were limited to email. I remember one of my favorite things was you, in many email exchanges, you would, at the end of instead of see you later or thanks or whatever you would say to sign an email, you would be like, in Florida, we have phones. I remember your first email was like, give me a call. Here's my number.
Yeah.
So,
Anyway, you called me out of the blue after we'd had some correspondence. I wasn't expecting a call from you. And I think we talked for a couple hours at least.
well, yeah. Skipping over that initial, when you couldn't talk because you were at the studio.
So I want to, there's something important about this call because I often talk to people that are in relationships and maybe they've done some growing and they've gotten clear about what they're on a growth path in life and they don't feel that way about their partner.
Don't feel what way about
the partner's not on a growth path. The partner doesn't really, or it could just be just a split in philosophy. Like there's just a different worldview and it seems really unmanageable. It's really hard. And what happens is they start to get picky about stuff on the surface instead of being able to address underneath. We just don't share the same values. Imagine one person being an atheist, the other person being deeply Christian or something. There's just this, it's really hard to manage these very different ways of looking at the world. And it's also where we could feel really alone in a relationship, even though we have somebody with us all the time and we might do something with them. We might be very active with them, but we might feel really alone in the relationship. And so a lot of us desire to have community around these deeply shared values, but what if we don't have that with our partner? And so I meet a lot of guys that are done that. Maybe they met this person and they started out in a certain way, but then ultimately they just they get on their own growth path and then the other person isn't. They're just doing their own thing and they're kind of sleepwalking through life. And the other guy's like, I don't know if I want to be with this person anymore. They're great and I love them, but they're essentially sleepwalking. They're always like, how do I get them to blah, blah, blah? And I was like,
right.
You don't. But that first phone call, you grilled the fuck out of me.
I'd like to not think of it as grilling or interrogating.
I wasn't intimidated by it. I was really happy about it because you weren't curious about my favorite color or anything like that. You were drilling into to understand my worldview. You wanted to understand my values. And so I wanted to draw that up because we started from that place.
Yeah.
Really, there was no joking around, laughing about, do you like this show? Oh, I like that show, and that kind of stuff. It was boom. You probably don't remember anything about that call.
I mean, it was 20 years ago, but I do. I mean, I remember. I don't remember specific questions necessarily. I remember a few specific questions because they're just part of my.
Well, let me ask you this. So just leading up to the call, I'm going to call this guy. Did you have any sense of what you wanted to talk about?
I think that I mean, I definitely didn't go in with a script, but I do remember when I decided I wanted to really talk to you. it came from a place of genuine, like, all right, like this person there's some real potential here with this person as being a human being that might be part of my life. And so I need to just cut the shit and like find out who this person really is, like what really matters to this person. So it was in that arena, like it was in that kind of realm that I was coming to the call. With. I didn't have. I wasn't like I had I don't think I had a pre-planned. Like I definitely want to ask him about this or that.
So it was about more just what do I stand for? Kind of what are my values? You're
inviting me to reveal a little bit more than I normally would, but essentially, I mean, for in my day, back then, what I would do for, I don't know, it was for fun, but what I would do with a really good friend of mine and sometimes other friends too is we would go through like, what would you die for? What makes you kneel? What would make you kneel and bow? What do you want to live for? So that was already in my conversation. And when I had those conversations with my good friends, it really, did something, for all of us individually, but also it deepened our intimacy with each other. And it helped us really end up ultimately supporting each other as human beings and sort of our best selves in the world. And so that had already been a little bit of how I rolled. And I had gotten a lot of, I don't want to say I'd gotten a lot of flack. I wasn't like I was teased or anything, but I had a lot of experiences with guys where if there was a guy that I really liked, I would essentially want to have a very authentic, sort of radically honest type of conversation with them. And 9.75 times out of 10, I would scare them off. They were like, this is fucking awkward and weird, and I don't know what's happening. And can't we just talk about the weather or whatever? And I couldn't do that. I couldn't. Yeah. For me, it wasn't like, I'm not gonna open to you unless I know who's in front of me.
Right.
And to some degree, that's a safety thing for me. But to another degree, I think that just relating and being even just two bodies being together. I mean, this doesn't come from some conservative background, but just two bodies being together in a sexual way, like that can be a really sacred thing. And it's certainly vulnerable for a female to receive, a man. And so there was a lot more wrapped up into it, just as a value for me, how I rolled. So for me, when I came to that conversation with you, it was more like you meant enough to me. Like you had enough of my attention and my interest to matter for me to be like, all right, now I need to know who you really are.
That's really important because I think that if we think about how most of us approach dating, it's, I don't want to be alone. I just want to have have somebody to have fun with.
Or I don't want to be alone tonight.
I don't want to be alone tonight, or I got to make sure, even if it's just like, don't screw this up.
Right. Yeah.
Don't get rejected. And so we put on the fake, like we put on our best mask, so to speak.
For sure.
And we may never, like, it may not come off until quite a while later, but there's a purpose to it. And the purpose is don't get rejected. I don't want to be alone. A lot of us never really sit down and consider what's the purpose of our relationship. And a lot of times the purpose is, I don't want to be alone, or I don't want to look like an idiot, or, nobody likes me if I don't have a person in my life. What does that say about me?
Or I've been told my whole life that I need to be married or like with kids or in a relationship. Yeah, there's just all sorts of pressures around that. And I mean, we just talked yesterday about someone who like has to have a trophy. Like it's an accessory, like it's not.
So, but I think it's important to drive this, because it's not about who we really are, and it's not about what really matters to us. It's just about, let's just make sure we don't end up alone, or there's something
or
in
the
there.
image, or how. Yeah,
It's more superficial.
I don't know. Yeah.
So I want to say that as like, if I'm entering relationship from that superficial way, and I'm never willing to go into this deeper conversation,
Yeah.
then
That's
we
true.
never know if we have a connection there,
Yeah.
and we might miss it.
Well, and I do think that it saves a lot of time.
Well, yeah,
it's
you didn't
kind
screw
of
around.
efficient because there, shadow can come up and those kinds of questions, which it did many times with me with other people. Like shadow meaning the places that places people can't be with in themselves or with me, in a relationship that they couldn't be in a particular conversation on a particular topic, and so it saves a lot of time to just get to it. And
Well, I appreciate it because I think up until that point, I hadn't thought a lot about why I was with somebody. It was really just like, okay, this person's attractive, and they may not even be somebody I really like. There was a point where it's like, they're just attractive. I'm not even really going to be friends with them per se. Like, it was so shallow.
Well,
and then,
yeah.
And at the time when I met you, I was very aware that I wanted something, that I wanted to be with somebody and connect on the level that you were trying to connect with me there. And I was drinking it up. That conversation
you
was
were
just
drinking it up. It was
like,
really
thank freaking God.
gratifying to actually, and that. So there's two things that I want to say. You're moving kind of quick for my brain this morning, but there's two things that I want to say. One is that I didn't to clarify the context, because the way that you're speaking about it. It could be easy to assume that conversation was about me interviewing you in the form of like, why do you want to be in a relationship? And that wasn't what I was doing.
Okay. So
it definitely, there was no why do you want to be in a relationship on my end at all.
Okay.
So that feels important to clarify.
It was more what? Well, if it wasn't that.
Who are you?
Who are you? Yeah.
And what matters to you? As you answer that, then I get to see, oh, okay, this aligns for me. So here's a simple example of one of the questions that I asked you to just bring it into more specificity, is that I remember asking, and this wasn't in the beginning of the call, but somewhere in the call, it was like a 3-hour call, and somewhere in that call, I remember asking you if you ever have you ever seen a therapist, or if you ever would, like if you were in a relationship. It's one thing to go see a therapist on your own as an individual.
I was dating my therapist at the time.
That was a joke. To be really clear,
I got a break.
audience,
I got a break
fucking
on.
joke.
I didn't have to pay as much.
You're just like a serial therapist dater. Like you just look for therapists you can date.
Hey, listen, I was wondering if you could help me out with something else.
Oh man.
So you were asking if I'd seen a therapist, or if I
but there was sort of like I remember it was kind of a 2-part question, because seeing a therapist as an individual is one thing, because that's private. You can do that. Anybody can do that and not ever tell a single soul if they needed the help or needed support with a thing. But it's different when people get into a relationship. Somehow going to a therapist to get support with something in a relationship,
like as a couple, or just even
as a couple,
okay,
is different for people. There's plenty of people that will see a therapist individually, but will not go as a couple. And so one of my questions as a therapist who had experienced this people coming and people being resistant to coming in relationship was, would you, if you were in a relationship, would you ever, and you needed help, we got to a stuck place or whatever was going on.
yeah.
Would you be willing to go see a therapist? Is that something you would do? Or do you think that you would resist that? And I remember you were like, no, of course, like, duh. Like, if my car needs an oil change, I'll get an oil and go get somebody to give an oil change, or whatever you said. I don't know what you said at the time, but you made it very practical. And so it wasn't necessarily why do you want to be in a relationship type questions, as much as it was, who are you in like, who are you really? And what will you stand for? And so that is an example of like, okay, cool, that works for me. I wouldn't want to, as a therapist, I wouldn't want to date somebody with a huge stigma against therapy or therapists. Certainly not if I wasn't going to be in a relationship with somebody that, and I was looking at you as like, this could be a thing. This could like be a real thing. There's something here.
And we hadn't even met yet or
we
seen each
hadn't even
other.
met yet, but we were feeling like I was feeling like I just kind of knew in my, I don't know, there was something
What's that?
intuitively that was like, yeah, something was going on.
I'll put some flute in there.
Anyway, there was an intuitive piece. This is what I did with people, but also there was a thing around. I didn't ask that with other people. I asked that with you, though, and so there were other questions like, what would you die for? Like there were things like that. Like what brings you to your knees? And a lot of that was just trying to get to know you. Like who are you really?
Yeah, I remember after that conversation that, you know, I was determined. I was like, I'm just going to go meet her now. And it wasn't that I felt a huge sexual turn on. And it wasn't like I felt like, oh, I just made a good friend. Mm-hmm. But I had a sense of, man, this person and I feel like we really share a lot of in a worldview. We may have very different ways of expressing that. Mm-hmm. We do. We have very different ways of going there, but we seemed to share more of a language and a value system. And I hadn't had that really.
Yeah.
I'd met people that were in the same neighborhood, so to speak, but I hadn't met anybody that had this kind of value system. And I remember we were also having fun. There was some jokes and laughter, and we were in that too. And I appreciated that we could have the deep conversation and then also have a laugh here and there.
Yeah.
And so I remember though going to meet you, and it was kind of like, well, it's kind of hers to lose at this point. I was already a strong yes. Mm-hmm. Not like, okay, I'm going to date this person, but it was just more like, okay, well, let's see where it goes sideways instead of, I wonder if this will, I just remember it was such a different feeling going to meet you in that way because I'd met you and I think I knew, I was like, well, at least she's going to be a good friend of mine, a very dear friend of mine. Mm-hmm. And I was tired of having the girls I dated and having dear friends that I felt a real strong connection with,
mm-hmm.
deep values with, but I didn't want to be with sexually.
Yeah, that happens.
I was tired of that dynamic.
And so what was it like for you that when you first took me out on a date, I basically shielded myself. Yeah. Did you say as a Jedi?
You were dressed like a Jedi. You wore this robe.
I did not.
Well, what the hell was that? It was like
I had a skirt and a turtleneck on or something.
Okay, so you covered your entire body. And you had a helmet on.
My skirt was see-through, but it was dark and cold, so you couldn't see my tights underneath.
And you had your hair all drawn up.
Yeah, I had my hair in, I guess, in
you had like a gazillion. So you were hiding essentially all of your feminine features.
Hiding a lot of my features.
You were on the. You were like,
I
sorry,
would get
I'm late.
a lot of compliments.
Sorry, I'm late. I had a meeting with the Jedi Council.
So, what was that like for you?
Well, you didn't. It wasn't kind of my normal speed.
I know why I did that.
Yeah, it wasn't my normal speed. I was used to the heels and the bouncy and the cleavage.
Like, let me show my shit off so you want me.
And it's like, let's fucking do this. But no, I didn't get that.
Right. But so when you were like, you were wanting to, you said that you had people that were dear friends, but that you weren't attracted to. And then you had people that were.
I didn't feel any sexual attraction.
Right.
In that
and so
meeting.
you were,
but it wasn't also
still,
like, it wasn't like, well, it was just more like she's obviously hiding something here.
How did you know I was hiding something?
It's just the way we were wearing a fucking.
You knew I was hiding something.
Yeah, it's like you picked up a banner and you wrapped it around yourself. And
I mean, roughly, that is true.
It was it wasn't your typical first date,
Definitely not.
So you were still doing the game. You were still playing some game with me.
Yes, I was still obfuscating.
And what was that? Like, let me see if he likes me even if I cover up all the attributes?
Yeah, it was.
What'd you think of me? You were like, oh, what do you think of, like, Dexter as a baby name. You were like throwing out baby names during the appetizer.
Oh my God. He'd love to tell
What do
people
you think of Kyle?
that I was
What if we
like
named him Kyle?
proposing and trying to get you in bed.
You know, there's a flight to Vegas. Leaves in that 2 hours.
I bet you'd have gone running for the hills if I'd have done that.
That would scared me. No, I didn't feel any sexual. I didn't feel the tension there. And also, I think a part of me was like, wow, I was, okay, this woman's challenging. I wasn't intimidated, but you were very present and you weren't, I knew I couldn't like fuck around. And,
So that felt challenging to you?
well, challenging like in a good way, like here, be here. And so I think a part of me went in and if anything, just kind of, and I had to relearn how to integrate my sexual, kind of bring those two things together because they'd been split.
Yeah, and that, circling back to what you were saying around like what people really make it about when they're trying to date or find a relationship, that there was some of that going on. What you're describing is what was going on for you, and it wasn't like you were trying. You became aware of the dissonance when you sat in front of somebody that you were genuinely interested in, but that wasn't actually going to play into all the things that go with that culture or with that way of dating.
Yeah. Do you think that people that don't have that strong shared sense of values and worldview, can it work out with them genuinely?
I do think it can work out. I mean, you talked about somebody.
Like, what if one person's on autopilot and asleep at the wheel?
Yeah, that I don't think that it would be easy to live with a person like that. Like if you wanted to cohabitate, but there's kind of degrees. I do want to say that. I mean, you mentioned earlier and it's maybe splitting hairs, but you mentioned earlier like somebody that was deeply religious versus an atheist, and I mean, from my perspective, even though it might seem really kind of obtuse, is that I think atheism is actually a type of spirituality for people. The atheists might not agree, but from someone who's deeply spiritual, I see that also as like, okay, this is your
It's a belief system.
theological. Yeah, this is your system.
I think what I'm getting at, it's probably more along the lines where if somebody's like, hey, this matters, I want us to work on a thing, and the other person's like, there's nothing, we're fine. We don't need to work on a thing.
So that does matter. I think that, and then that's partly why in that 3-hour conversation initially, that's what I was trying to dig into a little bit, was like, what do you care for? What would you care for in a certain circumstance or whatever? What matters to you? Where will you stand up? And that I do think that people do. People in general, in terms of people that are looking to be in relationships and people that are presently in relationships and they're sort of not sure if they really want it to work out, or they're in love with the potential of whoever they're with or whatever. I do think it would save a lot of time. It would be really beneficial if people would just get super fucking radically honest about what is truly like aligned. What are they aligned with? What matters to them? What are their values? As you've been talking about value system, but like, what are their values, and see what are their beliefs? Where do they, what matters to them? Where would they stand up? What would they die for? What makes them kneel? Like those kinds of questions. It saves a lot of time because it then you get to see, do we have a shared belief system? Do we have shared values? Where do we meet? Where do we align? And where don't we? And sometimes there's places that we don't align that aren't a big deal. Yeah. So that's why I keep trying to be like, well,
let's go there
maybe,
because I think that's important, because if we're not dealing with the big deal stuff, and I don't even know that's on my radar. That's what I was alluding to before, which is my partner and I aren't on the same page on the deeper stuff. I'm always going to feel that anxiety and tension and that lack of connection. And then it becomes about, I start to pick, or, gosh, she never does this or she never does that. And I hear that a lot. And it's like, that's the smoke to the fire. Those problems are not that big of a deal when you have the big stuff in in person, like when you guys are on the same page with the big stuff.
It's the same with kids. Like if and I kind of come at, I mean, as a therapist, I'm going to get jargony for a minute, but I do think it comes down to like secure attachment, connection, deep bond, that kind of thing. So even if as a kid, is this true with adults, but as a kid, like they start getting pissy or start misbehaving or whatever, like, but if you connect with them, they settle, like they and their behavior settles. Mm-hmm. And so it's true in relationships too, that you can get kind of nitpicky about things. I mean, that's true with you and I over the years.
Counters.
If you get nitpicky about things, sometimes I'm like, okay, I get it. It might be an actual like clean the counter off, whatever. But then it might also be like, what's going on? We need to connect. We need to just really connect.
Yeah.
And if we really connect, then all that goes away.
Yeah. It's not that big a deal.
Like not be, suddenly it might still be a thing that you don't prefer, but it's not a point of make or break the relationship.
I think if without the big stuff figured out and clarified, for me, I would always feel hesitant to go deeper with the person or commit, whatever that means, because I didn't feel like we could work things out. Like it always felt like I was going to get boxed in. And when
that's true,
as we were getting to know each other, I felt like everything was workable. And it wasn't that, oh gosh, we've covered all of the topics and we know everything is perfect. It was more like, well, whatever comes up, we have the ability to work it out. Mm-hmm. And that had me relax.
Yeah.
Was just like, hey, no matter what comes up, we're going to be able to figure this out and work through it. We've got the skills and we're willing to bring in extra help. I didn't feel trapped in that way.
Yeah. And so in that initial call, just to circle back to underscore that one more time, I wasn't necessarily asking those kinds of questions. It was more about who are you that makes you the type of person that is a yes to anything being workable, that is a yes to getting help when you need help, that is a yes to trusting that it'll work out. Like,
you should create a questionnaire that scares the shit out of people.
Oh, that was like the majority of my dating life when I was.
Well, I think that's another part of it, because I
didn't have a questionnaire, but
I had reached that point where I was okay with being alone. And I think it sounds like you were okay with not having a significant partner. I think I was always going to just, I would be like, all right, well, I'll just date casually, but I'm okay with not having somebody really be in my life. But that's not okay for a lot of people. That's not okay to really be alone, and instead they'll allow somebody that's not that great into their lives, or somebody that doesn't really line up. And I think that's where I was like, no, I'm not. If I'm not going to, I want to be, if somebody's going to be in my life significantly, I've got to be a really strong yes to them.
Yeah.
And set that bar high.
That's true. And that I think that's a developmental thing too, maybe. Like they're not just an individual arc of development for a human being, but also like a relational development. Like I think, for many, many years, when I would try to have these kinds of honest conversations with people that I was interested in, I was looked at like I was from another planet, and like I just crawled out of the swamp or something. And so for many years, I had experiences that had me think it was me.
Well, I think that's great, because it is that. You were modeling and embodying, I'm willing to push somebody away or be judged negatively.
I wasn't trying to do that, though.
I know you weren't trying, but you were willing. The flip side would have been like, who do you need me to be, and who do you want me to be? How do you want me to dress? I'm going to play that character so that you like me.
Yeah, but I appreciate what you're reflecting, but that's not how it was in my brain. Like in my head, I was like, "What's wrong with me? What's going on?
So
why do I keep?"
Intrinsically,
what is it about me that keeps? Yeah, intrinsically, it wasn't a thing like I'm standing for this. It wasn't. It wasn't conscious for me. It just was what I needed.
Do you think you were just pushing motherfuckers away because you?
I don't think that I was, and
you can't get with this unless you do
I
this.
think what I mean by developmentally, though, is that there did come a time where I had, played the field enough, dated enough men, whatever you want to say. but I'd done enough of that world of being, trying to do the dating and relationship scene to realize, actually, this does matter to me. And if you can't hang, it's on you. And so it did over time as I got older, and I met you when I was older. You know, I was in my mid 30s, I think.
Early 30s. Yeah.
Early 30s when I met you. But so I had lived enough to get tired of things. And I had absolutely, part of my year-long commitment to not be in a relationship before I met you was that. Like, I had been a serial monogamist, you know, and anybody that wanted to date me, if they could hang enough for my questions, I would be like, sure, I'll date you. You know, like, there was a thing of doing the programmed, like, be in a relationship type thing. And so part of my thing was like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of, like, me not actually going after what I really want, number one. And number two, I'm tired of this, just all this. This is really not working for me. And so, and I got hooked in just like anybody else. The relationship I was in before I decided to go on that year-long stint was somebody that I fell into, like, oh, and this could be somebody that we build a life together. And like, it was all as much inside as it was coming at me from the outside.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of being really clear, like, you know what? I think I would be great if I was not in a relationship, but maybe I'll just be single. Like, I'm just going to choose not to ever marry or choose not to be in a relationship. And I can still have relationships. I can still have romance. I can still have loverships or whatever, but maybe I won't get married, or maybe I won't go down that kind of traditional or conventional path. And I think I'm going to be just fine with that. And so that was a pivotal, when you were talking about, like, not needing to have a partner, I was in that place where I had arrived at that, and I needed that.
And that was really refreshing for me to be with you, because I'd been with a lot of girls who were like, this guy, I just got it. He's my ticket. Like, we can have the wedding I want to have and the babies I want to have, and he'll buy the house. Like, I could feel that energy of, like, if I play this right,
sure. I mean,
he's the guy.
I have a lot of compassion for that, people with that energy, because it is so fucking programmed.
But the thing I want to say is that I went through a similar version before we met. It wasn't that, it was several months before I met you. And I was tired of complaining about the relationship I was in. And in the relationship I was in, we just didn't have that shared foundation. And it was no fault of anybody. It was just, we were very different. Yeah. And I was so tired of bitching and complaining. And if only she would do this, and if only she would do that. And I had to get to the point where I was sick of hearing myself talk about that, because it just felt like a victim. And I was talking to my buddy Alex, and I was like, you know what I want? And I got into a state, and I just went down the list of, man, I want to feel this way in a relationship. I want to be with someone who's like blah, 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 and this and that. And it was all these deeper values like you're talking about that we talked about. And it felt so amazing to own that. And it also, at the same time, there was a bit of, afterwards, a contraction of, like, that'll never happen.
Yeah, nobody exists.
And I'll be alone. But I remember just being like, you know what, though? If I can't have that relationship, I don't want to commit to something less.
Right.
That's the relationship I would be excited to commit to.
Yes.
And if I can't have that, I'm okay with being alone then.
Yes, exactly.
As weird as that might be to others or whatever, like, I'll go have flings and whatever and buddies, but I'm not going to lock in, be married and be committed, because it doesn't meet this criteria. And it did feel like I was setting myself up to be alone for a very long time. It made leaving that other relationship much easier, because it was like, this just isn't this. It's not going to be. So let's.
Do you ever think that your ex listens to this and she's like, God damn, would you quit dogging me?
I hope I'm not. I don't think I'm dogging her.
I'm just wondering. It's random.
Oh no! God! I wouldn't want that. No.
When you make the point, you're just making the point of how much you don't
We just, it was more
wasn't
like just
working
like,
for you.
she likes this flavor ice cream. I like this flavor ice cream.
Yeah.
Like to me, it's that way. It's
Yeah.
just, we're just not on the same
no hard
page.
feelings.
No hard feelings. And nobody needs to be wrong. Like that's your flavor. This is
important
mine.
to say. Yeah.
So it wasn't better or worse or anything like that. But I just wasn't willing to negotiate on these bigger pieces. And so interestingly enough, like crossing that boundary, like really feeling it, like, yeah, I'm willing to be alone. I'm willing to go into this uncertainty. I'm willing to go into this suck. And I'd already been alone. I'd done a year-long be alone thing before that, before I'd been in. So I was like, I can handle that. It's not a problem. But then meeting you and having that conversation, essentially you were calling forth. You were like, all right, what about this? And I was like, oh, here we go.
Yeah. And you really did respond. And I loved that. I mean, I remember there was surprise in your voice on the phone, but you also really leaned into it. You leaned into the conversation. I remember feeling that in you, even though I wasn't seeing you, or like it was only through your voice and the sort of pauses and cadence of what you were saying. But I heard that in you. And that was really appealing to me. That was really inviting to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that scared the shit out of me because I mean, ultimately, even though I was used to being the person that scared people off with these kinds of questions and this kind of honesty. And so when you really were willing to meet me there was, and particularly, I mean, that conversation was fantastic, but it was particularly after that when you had left a message saying you want to take me out and you're flying in to meet me and all of that. That was when I was like, oh shit. And that's why today is such an important day to me, because I realized I was going to have to rearrange my brain, basically, and make room in my whole world for you, which I had done a pretty good job creating a world in my brain and where I could be without a person like you. Like it would be okay in my life to not be with someone like you. And then to have you be willing to meet me in these places. Then I was like, oh fuck. I thought I had a plan. Like I was going to be single and now there's this guy. So that's why this day is so, I cry. You tease me that I'm not sentimental, but that's why this day matters.
Well, when we hung up, I was like, knowing that this person's on this planet, I'm not going to screw around.
Yeah, and I felt that in your rising to those questions, and I heard that in your voice when you said you wanted to meet me.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to my mom I think it was before you flew out, because I called my mom and was like, I met someone. And I can't remember what I said other than I met someone. And yeah, and what do you think? And I'm like, I think he's going to be something. And she was like, enough said. I said, what do you mean? Yeah, I haven't told you anything about him. She said, I can hear it in your voice. And that's what I heard in your voice. There was something I heard in your voice that was like, there he is. There's someone there. So we talk about the people that hang in the kind of snorkely, shallow end kind of places but they really actually want relationship. They want that deep bond. They want depth. They need to be able to have a deep dive. They need to be able to go to those places in themselves and with another person to find out, can they dive together or not? And so I did that with you. And I think to some degree I've done that with you at every turn of our relationship, at every important point where it was like, almost like, I guess it was a choice point or crossroads, you could say. Like there were times where we could have just jumped into a thing with our enthusiasm and like expectations for or whatever the potential was there. And I remember throughout our time together, there have been times where it's like, well, let's just slow down and let's talk, like, let's find out where are our ideals? What do we expect, or what does matter to us here? And where are we a yes? What would we be a hell yes to? And so there's been points in our life, even, whether it's just getting to know each other or moving. Like, I remember you were like, I'm going to move to Colorado. And I was like, whoa. And it wasn't just my own freak out about you coming out, but there was like have you thought, you've born and raised in Florida boy, like, do you understand what you're getting into with Colorado winter? And so there was sort of a thing like, are you still going to be a yes if it's fucking freezing and windy? And like, have you thought about that? So some of that is being controlling, but you can joke. But I, when we moved, like if we moved, it was like, what do you want? What do you really want? What do you need in a move? What do you want in a house? Like, there was just all sorts of times and points where we came together. But when we come together, it's not like, yeah, I want that too. It was like, no, you go to your corner, I'll go to mine. You write down and pay attention to what really matters to you. I'll pay attention to what really matters to me. And then we'll come together and share and find out where we're aligned.
Mm-hmm. Which is a lot different than what a lot of us are doing. We abandon ourselves as individuals.
Yeah.
What do I do to keep the peace in my relationship? What do I do to keep her happy or him happy and that kind of stuff? And there's not that idea of let's be strong individuals first.
Totally.
And it's tough. It's tough for both of us. I still feel it like, oh yeah, what do I want? And even encouraging you at times, what do you want?
For sure.
Or we can get lost in the family identity. It's really tough. But if we lose our identity there, then we're kind of screwed. Like, or we lose our individuality there, then we are screwed. It's like, well, then I need this in order to have me feel happy. And that's instead of I do what has me feel happy and I bring that to the relationship, and then that has us feel both, more energized.
Yeah, and I don't think that that's ever taught. I think what, it's not ever taught. That's just not ever taught. Other than be you, be yourself, like that's not, it's not taught in the way of like, here's why. Knowing yourself, being yourself really matters. Here's what it's for.
I didn't sleep with my therapist.
I know you
more
didn't.
than twice. More than.
Oh my God. Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because I was just reflected by a client when I was telling a client about how I did this sort of figuring out what's your aligned values. He was like, you should do a workshop on this.
I think you should.
And ever since I was like, that's a good idea. It is a good. So I'm glad you brought this up.
Make sure you're never with a man.
Make sure you're never with a man. Yeah, that's the workshop.
Never find your partner.
No,
Raise the bar up to this level.
I think I want to cook something up like that. It's simple
good.
enough to share with others, and it's always helped. Every
it doesn't have to be just for women. Like, it's for
no.
anybody.
Everybody I've shared it with when I work with, and individuals or couples, but everybody I've worked with, they're like, "Oh, that was really helpful." So yeah, this is the unprofessional way of being like, yeah, something's coming. Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
If these interviews are helping you, please leave a positive review on whatever podcast app you use so that others can discover the show more easily.